You see, the thing was that I'd already been at one university, and in an abnormal country, my own country. I mean, and which meant that the university I had been was one where politics were inevitable, and where education was a country where education was a prize rather than just a social thing. But you see, I was certainly among people for whom education was not so important at all. I mean, the majority of the students I was with were all from the English upper classes, and some of them from the aristocratic classes. I remember an 18-year-old Lord somebody or other, and another Lord somebody or other. And the way the lecturers, the dons, would really crawl, to them, and so on and so on. In other words, what I'm saying is that suddenly I was among people for whom education was merely nothing at all, just a social thing. That one of them was a guardsman, one of the Queen's guards. Those people who wear the bear hats at Buckingham Palace.
Those guys, yeah.
And actually, at the very first meeting with the lecturers to determine the timetable of tutorials and lectures, he simply said, I say, look here, I don't want to do all this hard work you've been telling us we've got to do. I just want to just come up from the guards, and I want to just do the minimum. You know what I mean? Yeah. I'm here just for social reasons, and I don't want to work hard. And I thought the lecturers would blow up and shout at him or something. They didn't. They merely smiled at him and merely said, "Oh yes, Peter, that's his name, Peter Carey." They wrote down the minimum he needed to study for the 3 years to get his degree. And there we all were, having been given all the heavy load to... but at the same time, look, I had come to England with a very bookish knowledge of the country. I knew most of its authors, and I knew the United Kingdom only through its authors, its poets, its playwrights.
But can you tell me some more about that? Because you mentioned D.H. Lawrence, James Joyce, but by that time you were familiar with more.
Oh, by that time, I mean, the D.H. Lawrence thing was when I was in secondary school. But Joyce, yeah. I mean, Joyce was Dublin, where I never went. I mean, Dublin, yeah, where I never went. And then after all, Joyce is more European than English or Irish, actually. How can I put it? You see, I was now actually on the soil where all these writers I'd been studying for years and years. I had lived and died, and yet the reality was so disappointing. Oxford has got one of the highest unemployment figures in England, let alone compared to Scotland.
The city of Oxford.
The city of Oxford, yeah. And Oxford is also segregated. Look, I thought I'd left segregation behind. It's segregated in terms of, you see, on the one side there is, if you are a student, you are actually part of the aristocracy of Oxford. But there is down there there is a whole army, thousands and thousands of ordinary workers who have lived and worked there, and some of them are thousands are unemployed, who live on social security. There in Oxford, and their job is either I would say there are only two industries in Oxford, either to work for the students, sweeping our rooms, cleaning up the university, and so on and so on, and so on, or working for British Leyland, the car company at Coley, the Coley Car Works. Now, their residential areas are totally cut off from the university. And frankly, the same kind of segregation apparently as a true affair. And if you try to cross the boundaries, if you as a student try to drink in pubs where the workers drink, you'd get beaten up. I got beaten up myself when I tried to drink with I got tired of the student pubs, and I wanted to drink in pubs where there were some, where there's some other black people. You know, there are many West Indian workers in Oxford, and the West Indians are actually the majority of blacks in Oxford, and I think in the whole of the UK. Of course, the second largest are the Asians, and they beat me up. I think it was from the way I talked. The man said, you're a student, aren't you?
It was not because of you were black.
No, just being a student.
But how many?
That's you belong to them. You're one of them. Yeah, you're not one of us. And that began to show me the irrelevancy of being part of Oxford University. That, oh shit, right now I've crossed that green belt.
Yeah, from the old township.
From the old township, and now the other side no longer wants me. I belonged nowhere. All the time I was in Oxford, I belonged nowhere. I was rebelling against being part of the official University of Oxford atmosphere. But the side I wanted to be with while continuing my studies did not want me because I was
one of them.
Studying. Well, I was one of those. And so I began to drink very heavily, and just to play my classical music and just read and drink, read and drink. And you can imagine the irony of my situation. I had left one artificial situation called Rhodesia, only to join another artificial condition called Oxford. And in both I couldn't feel at home. And only within the ranks of those who, like me, had in some way disgraced themselves by becoming anti-society, anti-establishment, anti-war, anti-the military, anti-the nuclear power, and so on and so on. In other words, one of the things, that's when I think my mind was radicalized in an international way. I no longer thought of, for instance, when I was still in Zimbabwe, in the then Rhodesia, I used to think of politics in terms of our own nationalism, and not in relation to anyone else, any other country. But then here I was. The people I was living with now, they really internationalized my outlook in such a way that, for instance, I feel free with anyone, no matter where they come from, as long as they are not trying to be artificial with me, That's why, for instance, in Black Sunlight, some people have got a problem. They can't decide whether Sally or Nicola or Catherine or Sergeant Joe are white or black, because I don't specify the race of anyone in there. Well, apart from the chief in the first chapter. House of Hunger necessarily, because it was set in Rhodesia. And for fuck's sake, having to use all those terms, white, colored, native or African, this and that. I mean, that's one of the problems I think Southern African writing will continue to have until the writers work out a non-racial way of writing. You get tired of reading descriptions. I mean, if you have developed emotionally and intellectually to the stage where for you it's not the color of the person, but the fire which makes them unique as an individual, then it can be very boring and very, it can make one very angry, because you are reading a book which categorizes everybody in terms of race.
Yeah. But it's historically,
historically
it's understandable.
Yeah,
still,
historically.
That in 1968 or
Yeah.
86, I mean, writers are still writing about racial questions and in terms of race.
Mm-hmm. But what I like
for me, that's understandable.
Yeah, but you see, for me, it's because Zimbabwe is now independent. It means that Zimbabwean literature no longer has to do that. But for the next few years, I think South African writers and Namibian writers will have to continue doing that. But once they are free, they can develop. Already one of their writers, J.M. Coetzee, who wrote, for instance, one of his novels, The Life and Times of Michael Kay, and so on and so on and so on. Especially The Life and Times of Michael Kay. He has already shown the way. He's a South African lecturer, white lecturer at the University of Cape Town. And his style, his language, the way he depicts in a very apocalyptic manner about his own society. It's totally above racism.
But he's a white man, probably that makes it.
Well, his own system looks at him like that, yeah.
It's for him probably easier to afford that. I mean, to go beyond the questions of racism than for a black man in his country.
Well, yeah. But at the same time, he's got a very strong class struggle consciousness. You know, sort of, you know, that in terms of social classes, South Africa. I mean, he doesn't analyze it from a racial point of view at all.